There's been a huge discussion about the financial crisis that Greece faces. There's a lot of discussion of what needs to happen. People talk about change. But the one question I had, which came to my mind, is, can we change? In order to explain that, I thought, okay, most of you know this guy, right? Albert E. Yeah? He kind of said, we cannot solve problems using the same kind of thinking we use to create them. And that in itself represents a huge paradox. And then when you apply it, so when you apply it, so what does it mean for the crisis Greece is facing? Well, it's a huge question, huge complex question. And to answer huge complex questions, I know you do one thing. You study hard, you go to university, you collect a whole bunch of data, you analyze it, and then you come to a conclusion. But I have a far more powerful weapon. That's my nephew, Yashas. He's 4 years old. And whenever I ask a difficult question or try to answer, he simply says, how come? Why? So one of the things I'm learning through this process is that when you ask a complex question, you don't necessarily need an answer. You might just need more questions. So to answer this complex question of Greece and change and financial instability, I thought, well, let me try by asking 3 more. And one of the questions which I think is interesting to ask is that to which the immediate answer is, I don't know. Because if you know the answer, you should have already done it. The next question is, in which system? We talk about there are a whole bunch of systems. In which system does this problem lie in? This is referring back to the question in the beginning, which said, we cannot solve problems at the same level, the same system in which we created them. And the very last one, what do I know? Let's start with trying to answer the third question first. But before we do that, remember, we're trying to explain it to a 4-year-old or look at it through the eyes of a 4-year-old. So if the answer is too complex, we're looking at it, we're asking the question, we're defining the system at the wrong level. So if we go to what do I know? The question, of course, comes up, how do I know what do I know? Right? And the answer to that, I think, is, well, what can I explain to a 4-year-old? Because everything else beyond that is covered in jargon. We cover it up with jargon just to make sure it looks good, it sounds good. But the question you have to answer is, what do I know? And in order to do it, you need to uncloud the jargon and decompose to the basic. Now, decomposing. Big word, what does it mean? Well, I thought, I'm a comics guy, I love comic books. So let's take a character and see what we can do. If you take a character, if you think of that as a system, you can break it up, right? You can always break it up. You can look at the left piece, the right piece, the bottom middle piece, and you can deconstruct the problem. Everybody talks about deconstruction right now. It's a huge thing. Deconstruct the problem, and you can solve it. You can choose a far more popular concept nowadays, modularize. Big word. Take the head, see what it does, look at the hands, look at the belly, in my case a big one, look at the legs, and then try to solve it piece by piece by piece by defining pieces of the problem. But decompose is not to deconstruct. It is not to make it modular. It is to strip the bullshit away. Okay? While keeping the fundamental structure in place, and hence reducing to the basic essence. And if you take that forward, it basically means this. You take a figure, you keep the very essence of it, and you break it down. The question, of course, everybody's going, okay, this is great, but how does this apply to reality? I'm getting there in a second. The second question, of course, is in which system does the problem lie in? Well, there are several types of systems. People talk about systems all the time. You've got the self-contained systems, so mathematicians in this room will say set theory, that's a system in itself. You have Mandelbrot, who talks about self-referentials. You have holistic system. Taleb talked about the black swan. You have Peter Senge, who talks about a much bigger system. People think of systems in terms of political, economic, value systems. But there's an issue. Because the moment you think from within the system, the moment you look at for a solution for in the system, you're biased. You're immediately biased by the system. So now that's a really big question. So at first I thought, let's try a very simple question. So the 4-year-old, I go back and say, I'm a physicist, by the way, say, the Higgs boson. Yeah? Does the Higgs boson exist? And the first thing he says is, who's he? And I try to explain to him, it's a particle. It's a small piece, elemental piece. And he goes, how come? So I forget that question. We'll start with something far more controversial. There's a system which says God exists, and there's a system which says God does not exist. I know the audience is going to debate this at some point, but that's not the purpose of this. In order for the system to prove God exists, you must start with an axiom or an assumption there is God. If you want to prove that God does not exist, you must start with an axiom, or you must start with an hypothesis, there is no God. And then eventually, in a convoluted manner, doing beautiful mathematics deduction, you can prove either of the two. But the issue is this. Nothing allows you to jump from one system to the other, except something far, far important. Intuition, gut feel, faith. Because what systems represent are your implicit and your explicit knowledge. It is intuition which represents your gut, your experience, your ability to think outside the box. So we define the system to create a platform for questions. So the question of I do not know starts getting answered. So how do we solve it? Well, it's very simple, right? You have a structure, a system, you decompose it, you look at the drivers of change, and boom, you have the answer. Yeah? No. Let me give you a few examples of trying to figure out what this means. So if you look at the human being as an example, right? You can decompose the human being, and you can take him down, and if there are any biologists in the room, I apologize, but let's take them down to the cellular level, right? Forget the RNA and the DNA level, go down to the cellular level. You've got a cell which has got a nucleus and a membrane around it. The cell in your hand looks exactly the same as a cell in your brain as a cell in your gut. Right? All three look exactly the same. And you know your body operates differently. How does that happen? It happens because the cell interacts with the environment and with each other. So drawing a huge leap of faith, I'm going to make the conclusion, human beings change through interaction. Take another example. You know, the Industrial Revolution took place. Yeah? Everything became either more efficient, the system as a whole, or you had uneconomical systems. This constant debate between making things more efficient. We made things faster, quicker, produced more. Or the system became uneconomical. If you look at Bhutan, for example, it measures its GDP by happiness. There's no way you can make that efficient. Right? Two very different systems. What goes in between is the concept of productivity. We need to become more productive. And productivity comes when you start using your tacit knowledge. When the tacit knowledge comes to the forefront, when you start using your gut, when you start understanding the problem outside the defined system, you start thinking about how to actually solve it. So the biggest question I think we're raising, or at least one of the things we want to do, is we want to move away from being efficient. We've done it. By being efficient, we've created the space. But the space now needs to be used to become more productive. So when we move away from the brain process and we start to make precise, in the brain we always make precise calculations. And otherwise, if you use the gut, it becomes imprecise. Take, for example, this is before counting started, okay? Everybody thinks counting started right in the beginning. It didn't. Counting came at a certain point. The number system, 0, 1, 2. We can all argue where the 0 started, but let's just stop there for a second. There's this guy, and he's a rich guy, has a lot of sheep, and he tells his son, ensure the sheep go out every day, go to the fields, let it graze. Once it's grazed, make sure every sheep is back in its enclosure. And remember, there is no counting. So you are that boy. What are you guys going to do? Any answers? How are you going to ensure that the number of sheep leaving is equal to the number of sheep coming in? It's a very simple question. Sorry? You build a fence. Okay, how big a fence are you going to build? Sorry? Tie them together. That's another possibility. But if I have 600 sheep, I'm going to be in a bit of trouble. Build a fence with limited space, okay? You can't, because you don't know how to count. There is no numbers. You give them names. You go Huey, Louie, Dewey, Mewy, Kiwi, Rewy, Bewy. Right? Yeah. Dogs, okay. I actually was thinking of something far simpler. I thought the best way to do it is take a bag, a pile of stones. The moment a sheep leaves out, you put a stone in the bag. All the sheep go out, and at night when they come in, I take the bag out, I take all my coins out, and if it's empty and the last sheep is in, I'm there. What's the problem with this system? Very heavy. The problem with this system is very easy to cheat it. Yeah. What happens is a couple of days later, a couple of weeks later, because it's a huge sheep population. A couple of days later, he finds out that his bag is slightly heavier, he thinks maybe I've grown muscular. And he notices there's more movement in the enclosure. All of a sudden, there's a bit more movement in the enclosure. And he thinks, ooh, the sheep are feeling a bit frisky. No, not true. What he does notice with his gut, the movement is there because there is more space. And because there is more space, there's more space because sheep are missing. So one of his friends took out a couple of these stones, took a couple of sheep away. And that's what I'm talking about gut. Gut gives you answers which precise systems do not. The last one. This is, for some reason, the lines don't show up. I used to be in healthcare. And if you look at healthcare as a system, this is just the very basic of it. You can draw a whole wall full of these, right? And that's basically the system. It's very, very complex. But what you need to do is you need to break it down into its drivers. And we know that throughout that system, if you analyze it, you get rising volumes, you get a complexity of treatment, you get people wanting better care, you get early diagnosis is necessary, and you get insurance systems coming into play. And from there, you completely decompose it and say, well, what is actually needed is information, diagnosis and prevention, and insurance. And based on that, you start to recreate again. Decomposition by itself is not enough. Once you've found your drivers, the very essence of it, you need to rebuild. So the solution, very simple. We create a framework, decompose it, and ask, can they have accidents? This is a new word, accident. And the reason I bring up the word accident is most innovations happen by accident. If you go out and say, I'm going to discover the wireless phone today, it's not going to happen, right? But what you do need is you need a framework. And one of the examples I'll give you of a nation similar to yours, India. In the 1990s, India liberalized all its policies. Its focus was to actually liberalize the coal industry. So it liberalized a lot of policies and everything surrounding it, and in the corner of it, there was a little policy change for IT, information technology. And what happened simultaneously is, US was the heaven, right? You got there, everything was solved. So all our smart engineers in the 80s left for the US looking to solve the big IT dream. They got frustrated. They came home, like people like Costas who come home. And they said, let's see what we can do. And within this framework, accidents start to happen. And India started its IT platform. Then its tacit knowledge part starts to move up. It starts to do business process outsourcing and whatnot. So the question I ask, I have no answers. The question I ask is, can we change? Is that the right question? I don't know. It's too complex for me. It's way, way too complex for me. But what I can ask, if this clicker works, is that, can Greece create the policy change? And are you all prepared to be the accident? That's the question I can ask.